The moment Grant Ellison rose from the banquet table, staggering, crashing hard into a waitress carrying a full tray of water, the sound of shattering glass was so sharp that even the roaring ballroom froze for a single second. Phones were instantly pulled out. Someone laughed. Someone called his name, not out of concern, but because they knew that a moment like this would spread at the speed of light by tomorrow morning. 10 minutes before that moment, the victory party of Ellison Freight Tech was taking place on the southern coast of the city, inside an exclusive zone an ordinary person would never set foot in. An $800 million partnership deal had just been signed a few hours ago. To everyone in this room, tonight was history. Bankers, shareholders, strategic advisors, glasses clinking nonstop, champagne being refilled without pause. Everyone was living in the feeling of, we actually did it. An entire generation of young people in suits stood around the table, proud to be Ellison people. Except for Grant Ellison himself. He sat there, in a freshly tailored ash-brown suit finished just 3 days ago, tie perfectly aligned with not a single crease out of place, hair styled in the textbook definition of a textbook CEO. The only thing that didn't match the template was his eyes. They were so hollow that, had anyone really looked, they might have thought he had just come back from a funeral, not a celebration. A colleague approached, shoulders still trembling from excitement. "Grant, aren't you happy?" Grant pulled off a smile, too perfectly rehearsed to ever be called real. "Of course I am. Isn't this the dream?" Then he downed his glass of liquor like a sedative, not like a drink to be savored. From the outside, this was a moment to be proud of. But inside Grant, the louder the music got, the larger the void in his chest grew. His best friend, the co-founder who once built the company with him, had left right before this deal happened, leaving only one final email. "I haven't seen you truly happy once in the last 5 years." His parents got divorced last year after 30 years of marriage, yet neither of them called Grant before signing the papers. The only message his mother left: "Don't worry about me. I can handle it." And the only woman who had ever truly touched his life walked away 2 winters ago. Her reason, wrapped in a single freezing text, were no longer right for each other. Grant took his second glass, then the third. Not because he wanted to be drunk, but because he was afraid he might stay sober. "Ladies and gentlemen, once again, congratulations to Ellison Freight Tech." The host on stage raised his glass. Everyone rose to their feet. Grant stood as well, by reflex. But his footing slipped just slightly. And then, the moment that opened this story happened. Grant turned to step outside, but his unsteady stride sent him crashing straight into a waitress just coming out from the kitchen. The clang of a stainless steel tray hitting the floor, water splashing across the evening gown of a female guest. Laughter broke out. An iPhone flashed a few rapid shots. Someone called softly, "Grant, you're drunk." It wasn't concern, it was anticipation. And that was the exact moment he was about to be exposed, if not for someone stepping in at the perfect second. Grant didn't react to the laughter erupting around him after the collision. His body swayed for a moment, then straightened, as if his pride was still just strong enough to hold him upright, even while everything inside had already collapsed. A waitress was kneeling to pick up shattered glass from the floor. Marley Quinn. Her hair tied low, white shirt damp at the sleeves, holding an empty tray, her eyes still trying to comprehend what had just happened. Grant looked at her, eyes bloodshot and hollow. Someone raised their phone and snapped a photo. Another person hit record. Behind them, a major shareholder, the same one who had just signed the expansion deal into Europe, stepped forward as if to help Grant up, but pulled his hand back and pulled out his phone instead. "Delete it," Grant muttered, eyes locked on the lens. "I said, delete it." No one responded, and something inside him finally snapped. "I worked day and night, haven't taken a single day off in 6 years. And all of you were just waiting for me to fall, weren't you?" Grant's voice rose, pulled off balance by alcohol, driven higher by wounded pride. He spun toward the shareholder and pointed straight at his face. "You wouldn't have signed that deal without me. Don't stand there looking at me like I'm a liability." The atmosphere of the party dipped. The music was still playing, but buried under a wave of murmurs. A few guests quietly stepped out of frame, distancing themselves. The company's PR team tried to move in, but Marley moved faster. She approached Grant, voice low and controlled. "Mr. Ellison, could you come with me for a moment? Your cousin asked me to take you somewhere to rest." Her tone was just loud enough for security to hear, but soft enough that it didn't sound staged. Without waiting for Grant's permission, Marley slipped an arm around his shoulders, signaling security to open the back hall doors. "He's having a drop in blood pressure," she said quickly. "I'll take him to the private rest lounge. It's cooler there." Grant could barely hold himself up. His steps were scattered, and he could only manage to ask, "Who are you?" Marley didn't answer. She guided him through the service hallway behind the kitchen, where chefs were moving in and out frantically, too busy to notice a man on the verge of collapsing. The staff break room was small, just a long sofa, a uniform cabinet, and a slow ceiling fan. Marley eased Grant down first, then closed the door and locked it from the inside. "Sit. Don't say anything. Don't try to stand up anymore," she said softly but firmly. Grant leaned back, head tilted against the wall, eyes closed, lips dry. His tie was completely crooked, the top 2 buttons of his shirt undone. Sweat pooled at his temples. Marley fetched a cup of water from the dispenser, poured it into a plastic cup. Then she grabbed a cold towel from the staff freezer and placed it gently on his forehead. Her hand trembled slightly. This wasn't part of her shift, but she couldn't let this man fall apart beneath the eyes of the world. Grant opened his eyes, staring up at the ceiling, mumbling, "You think I deserve that?" Marley didn't answer. A moment later, his voice came again, almost choking. "I built an entire empire, from nothing, and even my own mother can't be proud of me." A quiet breath escaped him. "She asked me one thing, right after this deal was signed. Have you eaten dinner? That's it." Marley paused. She reached for another towel and gently wiped the back of his trembling hand, shaking out of his control. "You need to sleep for a bit," she said, not as a command, but as an invitation to finally rest after a very long war. No one came. No one knew. No more photos were taken. Grant turned slightly, eyes closing. His body finally loosened. The last words he whispered, just barely enough for Marley to hear, were, "Don't let them see me like this." Marley stood up, stepped back toward the door, and locked it from the outside. She didn't call an assistant, didn't alert security, didn't tell a soul. She simply returned to the ballroom, slipped her apron back on, and carried another tray as if nothing had happened, as if she had just saved a man, with no need for anyone to know. The room was so silent that Grant could hear the ticking of the wall clock, a sound almost non-existent in the life of a CEO like him. He opened his eyes. A low ceiling, a slow-turning fan, the lingering scent of medicated oil and floor cleaner. Not a hotel, not a conference suite, not his home. A sharp headache pulsed from the back of his neck, spreading to his temples. Grant pushed himself upright, his collar crumpled, his tie hanging off the armrest, his shirt slightly damp. His entire body felt like it had just survived a storm. Though strangely, he couldn't quite remember when the storm began. He looked around. On the table beside him was an opened bottle of water, and a small folded note, written by hand in clear, steady strokes. "No one is coming back. I asked them to delete everything. If you're reading this, it means you still have the chance to keep it to yourself." Grant stayed silent. He tightened his grip on the paper, as if to test whether this was some elaborate joke, a damage control setup by internal PR. But that handwriting, it didn't belong to anyone in his company. He tried to piece his memory back together. Fragmented flashes flickered like a corrupted film reel. The crash of water, a tray hitting the floor, blinding lights, then a hand wiping his face with a cold towel. And then a face. Not fully familiar, but impossible to call a stranger. Deep brown eyes, calmly alert, hands trembling faintly as she poured water, yet fighting to remain composed. That woman did not seem like just another waitress. Grant stood, his body still slightly unstable, but leadership instincts kicked in, making him immediately assess the situation. His phone was still in his vest, low battery but working. No emergency alerts, no leaked footage, no messages from his assistant. Meaning, the note was true. He stepped out of the room, walked down the back kitchen hallway, keeping his presence minimal. A few restaurant staff passed by, none of them looking at him for more than 3 seconds. At the main lobby, morning sunlight streamed through the glass, casting a thin golden sheen across the marble floor. The guests were gone. The celebration had ended hours ago. Only logistics staff remained, clearing out floral arrangements and partner name boards. Grant walked straight to the management desk. "Excuse me, I need to know who was assigned to staff restroom B03 last night." The manager, a middle-aged woman, face worn from the overnight shift, hesitated. "Sir, We don't disclose staff information to anyone outside the approved list. She was the one who helped me." Grant didn't elaborate. He didn't pull rank. He didn't use authority. He simply spoke like someone trying sincerely to repay a kindness. The manager exhaled. "I understand, but I truly cannot share that information. Internal policy." Grant nodded, not pressing further. He turned to leave, but his eyes caught on a duty board hanging by a side door near the desk. A faintly flipped name tag, a small handwritten slip in black ink. Marley Quinn, evening shift, 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. Grant froze. He had never heard that name before. It didn't exist in his company's personnel system, and it certainly wasn't on the guest list. But somehow, that name stayed in his mind longer than it should. On the way to the parking lot, Grant wasn't thinking about the $800 million deal, not about market reports, not about the speech he forgot to deliver last night. He was thinking about the sentence that slipped out of him when he lost control. "Even my own mother can't be proud of me." He didn't remember whom he said it to, but she definitely heard it. A stranger, no connection, nothing to gain, and yet, she didn't judge. She didn't turn away, she didn't record him, didn't demand anything. She simply left a glass of water, and a single note, just enough to pull him back from being humiliated before the entire world. Grant didn't know what to call this feeling. Shame? Yes. But beyond that, an unsettling clarity. As if someone had looked straight through the tailored suit, past the contracts and titles, and touched the part he'd been trying so hard to hide. The real part. A part of him he truly believed no one wanted to see anymore. 4 days later, Grant returned to the restaurant with a carefully crafted excuse to evaluate service quality for a potential internal events partnership. He wore casual clothes, came without assistance, no prior notice, same lobby, same lighting. But this time, no champagne, no applause, just the quiet clink of spoons and chopsticks from a small group of diners in the far corner. He asked a staff member about the person in charge of the evening shift that night. They didn't know. Grant didn't rush. He ordered an iced tea, chose a seat near the service counter, and simply watched. It wasn't until close to the end of the shift that he saw that face again. Marley Quinn stepped out from the kitchen, hair still tied neatly, white shirt now paired with a pale gray apron. Her eyes were the same, steady, present, neither vacant nor cautious. She paused briefly at the sight of Grant, but didn't panic. She continued clearing tables as usual, walking past him as if he were just any other guest. Grant waited until she passed by the third time before speaking, just loud enough for only her to hear. "Thank you for that night. I owe you more than words." Marley didn't stop, but she replied, eyes steady, voice level. "I just did what needed to be done. Someone had to let you keep a little dignity, that's all." Grant watched her walk a few more steps, then said quietly, "I'm not here for PR. I'm here because I want to understand the person who pulled me back from the worst version of myself." Marley slowly set her tray down on the side chair, arms lightly folded. Not defensive, but not exactly open either. Her gaze carried the calm of someone who had seen this kind of thing too many times to be surprised anymore. "Then now you know. I'm the one who wipes tables, keeps cold water in the staff freezer, and works 3 extra shifts a week to afford my mother's medication. She has chronic kidney failure, waiting for a transplant. What I'm best at isn't saving people. It's calculating whether I can cover the electricity bill this month." There was no trace of self-pity in her voice. She spoke as if stating the weather. Ordinary. Matter of fact. Nothing about it asked for sympathy. Grant tilted his head slightly, listening, then fell silent for a few seconds. The woman in front of him was holding a version of reality he had never truly touched. A world without million-dollar contracts, without KPI dashboards, without parties where people laughed but never met each other's eyes. A world where people simply tried to survive 1 week at a time. He spoke again, softer this time. "Why did you help me?" Not everyone would have made that choice. Marley bent down to pick up a fallen napkin near the table as she answered, still not looking at him. "I didn't save you because of who you are. I did it because I once watched my mother collapse in a supermarket, and people looked down on her. No one helped. Some even laughed. If you've ever witnessed that, you don't ever want to let it happen again, to anyone." Grant said nothing. He couldn't. He had encountered every kind of reaction before. Admiration, flattery, envy, indifference. But this was the first time someone looked at him not as a millionaire, not as a fallen figure, not as a hero or a disgrace, but simply as a human. trying to hold on to whatever was left unbroken. Marley didn't stay any longer. She lifted her tray and walked back to the counter without another word. Grant remained seated for another 10 minutes, untouched glass of iced tea before him. In his mind, he replayed her words over and over. I didn't save you because of who you are. I did it because I once saw my mother being looked down on. For the first time in years, Grant felt the heaviness in his chest, not from failure, but from the realization that someone had just reminded him of this quietly brutal truth. There are small things in this world, invisible, uncelebrated, that if no one does them, the world grows worse in silence. Grant returned to the restaurant again, then again, and again. Week after week, same seat by the window overlooking the beach. No extravagant orders, just an espresso. Or sometimes, even just water. Every time Marley appeared, he simply nodded. She never asked questions. There was nothing you could call familiarity between them, yet something nameless had begun to form. Like a tangled thread of wool, one gentle pull away from becoming a clear strand. One late afternoon, the restaurant was busier than usual. A middle-aged customer lost his temper over a delayed dish. He raised his voice and directly blamed Marley, though it was clearly not her fault. She stood still. She didn't argue, yet her expression remained composed, unnervingly so. When the man hurled a disparaging remark, Grant immediately stood. But Marley glanced at him and gave a subtle shake of her head. After things calmed down, Grant waited for her to bring the bill. He said quietly, "You didn't have to tolerate that." Marley smiled, not sadly, just gently. Not every good person needs to jump in as a hero. Sometimes staying silent and staying present is enough. That sentence lingered in Grant's mind for a long time. On the drive home, he didn't play music like he usually did. Only Marley's voice echoed in his head. Not loud, not moralizing, just a gentle reminder, strangely heavy. That night, he reopened an old photo hidden in a drawer. Him and his mother, at his MBA graduation. He wore a green gown, holding his diploma, standing perfectly straight. His mother beside him, face radiant, yet her eyes more stern than joyful. She had once taught him to always control his emotions, always be on time, and never be sentimental. When someone criticizes you, if you're not wrong, stay silent. Silence is the strong person's answer. Later, when Grant started his company, those words became his compass. But he also grew distant from her, partly because of work, the rest he couldn't even explain. Their calls became infrequent, their meetings even rarer, their conversations reduced to brief reports, casual updates. When she was hospitalized after a minor stroke, Grant was in the middle of a negotiation with investors from Singapore. He chose to stay in the meeting. His mother didn't blame him, didn't bring it up again. But from that moment on, the two of them were like two branches of a river that had split apart. Sitting now in his spacious apartment overlooking the harbor, Grant suddenly realized one thing. He had learned how to face things, but had lost the ability to feel. The next day, Grant arrived at the restaurant later than usual. It was quiet. Marley was behind the counter doing inventory. He walked over, speaking with no pretense. "I've been thinking about what you said about your mother." Marley looked up, slightly surprised but not avoiding his eyes. "I want to help," Grant said sincerely. "I can offer financial support. If your mother is waiting for a kidney transplant, you must be struggling. I can cover the costs." Marley didn't thank him. She stayed silent for a few seconds, as if choosing her words carefully to not offend him, but still stay true to what she believed. Finally, she said, "I appreciate your intention, but I don't need a favor. I need to know how long I can still stand on my own." Grant paused. This wasn't prideful rejection. She said it like someone who clearly knew the boundaries of her dignity and was protecting it with everything she had left. "To me," she continued, her voice quiet but firm, "taking care of my mother is not a burden. It's the thing that keeps me steady. If I let go of it, I'm afraid I'll be the one who collapses first." Grant looked at her. In her eyes, he saw the same resolve he once saw in his mother. But unlike his mother, Marley didn't use her strength to build walls. She used it to hold on to her humanity in a life that was anything but easy. He didn't say anything more, just gave a small nod. The conversation ended just like that. But inside Grant, something had begun to change. That night, he took a blank sheet of paper and opened an old watercolor set. It had been a long time since he last painted, but his fingers still remembered how to mix colors, how to soften edges with water. He didn't paint the restaurant, and he didn't paint Marley. He painted a woman sitting by a window, holding the hand of someone who was asleep, light pouring in from outside, faces unclear, only silhouettes and gentle streaks of light. It wasn't a technically impressive painting, but it was the first thing he created not for any purpose, except to keep a feeling alive, the feeling that someone was there, quietly, without judgment, without needing a reason. The next day, that painting sat on his desk, among stacks of contracts and investment plans, like a small dot on a map, marking the place where a heart once softened and began to feel grateful. That morning, Grant's phone wouldn't stop vibrating. A flood of notifications lit up the screen, clips from a viral podcast spreading like wildfire. The topic? A successful leader or a traitor to his own team? An episode about Grant Ellison. His former co-founder Logan Pierce had made a surprise appearance on the show, speaking publicly for the first time about why he left the company. In the podcast, Logan didn't raise his voice. He spoke with calm clarity. Grant is a genius, but he chose victory over friendship. When we had the chance to take on a major investment, he agreed to trade ownership and completely cut the division I was leading. No meeting, no warning. To Grant, emotions are things that don't belong in a financial report. The podcast gathered millions of views within hours. News articles, tweets, reaction videos exploded across the internet. Grant Ellison's name was once again everywhere, not for his achievements, but for the question of his ethics. The company's communications team immediately called an emergency meeting. Some suggested hiring a lawyer to issue a formal denial. Others wanted to release evidence to counter the claims. Grant just sat there, silent, saying nothing. That night, while his laptop screen still glowed with non-stop news updates, Grant put on his coat and walked out. It was drizzling. He didn't open an umbrella. He just walked, straight to the familiar seaside restaurant. The place was quiet. The only background music was the steady rhythm of waves in the distance. Grant chose his usual corner table. He didn't check his phone, didn't look at the menu, just lowered his head, hands clasped together. Marley stepped out from the kitchen, saw him, and wasn't surprised. She picked up a glass of water, walked over, and placed it gently in front of him. She didn't ask anything, didn't even greet him. She simply sat down in the chair across from him. Minutes passed in silence. Then Marley spoke, her voice calm and low. "I'm not here because I think you're right or wrong. I'm here because when people are misunderstood, the scariest thing isn't being judged, it's being alone." Just one sentence. Nothing more. Grant lifted his head. His eyes were red. His expression was no longer the hard-edged CEO, but a man splitting open at the seams he had always kept hidden. His hand gripped the glass so tightly his knuckles went white. His voice broke, and then he cried. A sound escaping like a storm that had been held back for 20 years. No one stood up. No one turned away. Marley remained there, not touching him, not comforting him, just present. Silent. And enough. That night when he got home, Grant opened his laptop. He didn't check his email, didn't look at the stock charts. He opened a blank editor and began to type. Not a formal statement, just a simple post on his personal account. "I read what people said about me today. Some of it is true, some of it is not. But I won't argue. There is one thing I know for certain. I once chose success over the people who walked beside me, and that is nothing to be proud of. I'm not writing this to ask for forgiveness. I just want to thank a stranger, someone who reminded me when I had forgotten who I was, that water soothes, while alcohol only burns. The next time you're caught between two choices, maybe choose water. You might save something of yourself." No photo, no hashtag, no call to action. A few minutes after it was posted, the message began to be shared. But this time, not with outrage, instead with an unfamiliar silence, as if people had just witnessed someone they believed incapable of weakness speak the most shameful truth about himself. And somehow, that made them want to trust him again. More than a month after the post that shook the business world, Grant Ellison said nothing else, no debates, no explanations. He simply went back to work, but everything around him had changed. Employees no longer lowered their heads in fear when he walked by, and he no longer walked too fast, as if he were trying to outrun something. One quiet Friday afternoon, Grant sent Marley a short message. "Are you free Saturday? There's an exhibition at Art Space. It's not loud." Marley replied with just a thumbs-up emoji. She didn't like unnecessary words. The exhibition was a series of silent paintings titled Inner Dialogue, a project funded by the Contemporary Arts Support Foundation that Grant's company sponsored. But he never mentioned that to her. He didn't want the meeting to feel like charity or PR, neither of them dressed too formally. Grant wore a deep navy sweater and gray trousers, hair neatly swept aside. Marley stayed true to herself. Denim jacket, low-tied bun, and slightly worn white sneakers. They didn't hold hands, didn't lean toward each other. They simply walked, side by side, slowly, as if testing with each step whether the other was still there. The gallery was quiet, softly lit, ambient with gentle recordings of slowed-down monologues playing through hidden speakers. One painting made them stop longer than they expected. It was nothing more than a white table, with two objects on it, a glass of water and an unopened bottle of liquor, placed exactly one handspan apart. Marley looked at it for a while, then said softly, "You chose the glass at the right time." Grant glanced at her. That voice wasn't praise nor admiration. It was simple acknowledgement, calm, unembellished. Her way of saying, "I saw, and I believe you." He didn't respond. He just inhaled slowly, as if trying to preserve this moment inside a single breath. Then they moved on. No talk about art. No poetic interpretations. They simply stood before each frame, then stepped to the next, like two people reading the same book, without needing to say a word aloud. When they exited the gallery, Grant paused at the steps. The streetlights were on. The wind was still. He looked up slightly, his voice low. "The day I closed the 800 million deal, I remember standing in front of a mirror and feeling nothing but emptiness." Marley stayed silent. She didn't push him. "I used to think I needed at least $10 million to be respected. That without that number, I was nothing." She tilted her head slightly, eyes never leaving him. "But now," Grant said with a faint smile, "I think being in the right place, at the right time, with the right person, might already be enough." Marley didn't smile, but her eyes held a deep, quiet peace. Not quite emotional, but like a profound acknowledgement. As if what he said didn't need to be remembered, only needed to be heard, for it to be real. As they stepped down to the street, Grant slowed for a moment, then turned to her. "Marley?" She looked up. "This is the first time I've remembered someone's name without my assistant reminding me." She let out a small, genuine laugh, then kept walking, the soft sound of her shoes tapping lightly on the concrete. And this time, she walked just a little closer. One early autumn Saturday afternoon, the sunlight was gentle and the air cool enough to make the elderly feel at ease. In the small garden behind the Kidney Transplant Recovery Center, a few stone benches were scattered beneath the trees. Sparrows hopped from branch to branch. The silence felt like a wordless song. Marley pushed her mother's wheelchair into a patch of sunlight, her hands still holding her mother's. Her mother wore a pale beige cardigan. Her hair had thinned, but her eyes were clear, kind, and deep. Marley stopped beneath a large tree, adjusted her mother's scarf, then sat beside her, saying nothing. A moment later, soft footsteps sounded on the gravel path. Grant appeared, in a blue checkered shirt, holding a small lavender plant wrapped in tissue paper. He paused for a moment, then approached slowly, careful as if not to disturb the peace of this place. Marley looked up, squinting slightly against the sun, and smiled softly. Grant offered a nod instead of a greeting, then bent slightly to bow to her mother. "I hope it's all right if I brought some flowers," Grant said softly. "I'm not sure if you like lavender, but they say its scent helps with sleep." Marley's mother looked at him for a few seconds, then smiled gently. "Are you the one who made my daughter smile again?" Grant was caught off guard. He glanced at Marley, who simply kept her eyes forward, neither confirming nor denying. A light breeze lifted a strand of hair across her forehead, then let it fall onto her shoulder. "I don't know if I've done anything," Grant replied quietly. "But I think she saved me first." Her mother asked nothing more. Her gaze drifted toward the distance, where white daisies were blooming along the fence. In that moment, none of the three needed another word. Grant sat down on the stone bench across from them. He set the potted lavender gently on the ledge, then opened a bottle of water he'd brought along and poured it into a clear paper cup. He placed it beside Marley's mother, almost as a reflex. Then he stood, brushed his hands lightly against his pants, and nodded to Marley. "I should go, but thank you for letting me be here." Marley said nothing. She simply rested her hand on the cup of water, her way of replying, and watched as Grant walked out of the garden, back straight, steps steady. She didn't know whether they would ever meet again in a moment like this. But that didn't matter. Because sometimes the right thing is not to fix or change someone, but simply to be present, with kindness, and with enough awareness not to disturb another person's peace. Some people enter our lives not to stay forever, but to remind us that sometimes a single glass of water at the right moment can save a person from sinking into the wrong path. Not everyone needs a hero. Sometimes all they need is someone who stays, without judgment, without walking away. Clear-headed enough to keep the silence safe. What about you? In the moment someone is at their weakest, will you reach out your hand or turn away? If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next emotional journey. Thank you for staying until the very end. See you in the next story.